this is going to be like a foundational episode. This is nothing more or less than a look at the syrups that you probably want to keep behind your bar and how to make them. So this is like HTD reference material. Probably all my episodes going forward will just point back to this one. So let's make some syrups today on HTD. All the syrups that are fit to drink. Drinking syrup, pure syrup. So a long while ago, I was working on an episode that was all about accessible whiskey cocktails. It was a partnership I was doing with the Yellowstone Bourbon, great bourbon by the way. I chose to include a drink from Eric Castro called the Kentucky Buck. It's an amazing drink, but it calls for ginger syrup, and to do it right, I had to make that syrup the way that Eric makes his, which was different from how I've always made mine. And that got me thinking I should do like an episode update on that process, kind of do a ginger syrup episode, because my ginger syrup episode that I'd made was shot on an iPhone next to a pool. It's not like very cool looking. And then from there, I started thinking about how really I should probably just sort of broadly address all of the typical syrups that you're going to use behind the bar and how to make them. So today we're going to do that. So let's get started with these dang gone syrups. I'm going to get to the ginger syrup that kicked this whole idea off later on in this episode, because I feel like I should really start with one that's so basic it's practically in the name. My old pal, simple syrup. Here it is, my simple syrup. Seriously, simple syrup. I know that for a lot of you, most of you, all of you, this might be rudimentary stuff, but I do feel like it's important to cover the basics. Don't worry, I don't want to spend too long on it, but there are a few things about this that I want to get across that I think are important. You guys are always asking me questions about my simple syrup anyway, so maybe it's totally valid to spend a little time on this. Look, the idea when you make simple syrup is you're doing nothing more than getting sugar dissolved into water to create a solution. A solution, if you remember your high school chemistry class, is a pretty permanent thing. The sugar won't just like fall back out of the water, except sometimes to crystallize. And to get to a solution, we got to get this right through being a suspension first. And that's done basically by adding energy. Usually I do this on the stove. I will just heat it until it boils for about a minute, and then voila, it's done. So you can use a blender too, just let it go for a really long time. I don't like that as much because it'll leave a lot of air bubbles in there, and they take a long time to get out. And probably if you're using the blender to make your simple syrup, because you need it now for a drink, and then of course you have this simple syrup with all these air bubbles in it, you're better off just biting the bullet, I think, going with the hot. Some people insist on shaking it to make their simple syrup. I mean, sure, but why? I don't know. There are people who insist that cold processed simple syrup is somehow superior. I'm ignoring that notion. I don't see how that could possibly be true. You can make it using plain white sugar or demerara sugar or organic cane sugar or really whatever sugar type thing you want. You will get slightly different colors and flavor profiles from each of these, and you might want to experiment with that and find out what you like, and maybe you like different things from different drinks. You know, a lot of people think that, like, certainly if you want it to come out clear, you should be using a white sugar. If you don't want it to affect the color of the drink, like a demerara will darken a drink severely. But like in a lot of tiki drinks and rum drinks, certainly like it's good, that's fine. And an old fashioned, it's fine too. I always make my simple syrup as a 2-to-1 ratio. That is 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. Somewhere along the line, somebody got their wires crossed on David Wondrich's terming of demerara simple as being rich simple. And instead of, because he came up with that in Imbibe, he says, I make it with a demerara syrup and I call it rich simple. That's what he meant, as far as I've read. And instead they started calling all 2-to-1 syrups rich simple syrup. And based on how often I hear this, I think it must have stuck. This is a linguistic mistake that I must discourage. Making all 2-to-1 syrups rich kind of inverts the origin of the recipe for this stuff. If you look at the very old bar manuals, like the Jerry Thomas Guide, they give their recipes as being 2-to-1. Sometimes more than 2-to-1, you know, like as much sugar to as little water as they could possibly get away with and actually have it dissolve. Which means that 2-to-1 isn't rich simple, that's just plain simple. If anything, the 1-to-1 stuff is a thin simple. And there's a very good reason for making 2-to-1 your de facto standard, by the way. It is indefinitely shelf stable. This doesn't need to go in the fridge. And if you're making cocktails and you have a few different syrups going, it's great to not have to keep them in your fridge unless you have like one of those, like, you know, sick, like millionaire grade, like Sub-Zero fridges. That's like all of your cabinets or refrigerator or something like that. Okay, you can do whatever you want. But like the rest of us, I don't have that much space in my fridge and I got kids to feed. So it's great to not have this in the fridge. And also, basically, like honey, it really can't go bad. It might crystallize a bit, but you can solve that if it bothers you by reboiling it the same as honey. You can actually, when, you know, if there's like some crystals at the bottom of this, When you make your next batch, just like boil it up and throw it in on top and shake it up, and you'll dissolve a lot of those crystals back off. It doesn't really matter. A lot of people ask, do you add some alcohol to it? Actually, Jerry Thomas's guide calls for throwing a little high proof, rectified spirits in there to keep it clean. I think this is witchcraft. This is hokum. It doesn't really, you're not increasing the proof enough to do any kind of sterilization. What I do say is make sure your glass is super duper clean. I boil these, I wash them, I scrub the inside with a set of bottle brush, wine bottle brushes, which is, I think a wine bottle brush is one of the most important tools you can have behind your bar or in the kitchen adjacent to your bar where you do your dishes, because washing the insides of your bottles is huge. The concentration of sugar at this level is high enough to be toxic to just about anything that wants to live in it. And I need to be careful if I go on much further about just how toxic a substance sugar really is, or the sugar lobby might hit me with a cease and desist order. And since all of these old books that I'm talking about, like the Jerry Thomas Guide, describe 2-to-1 simple in their guides, that means all of the recipes in those books are calling for a 2-to-1 simple as well. Regardless, go 2-to-1, go 2-to-1. It's up to you. If you think something is too sweet or not sweet enough, you can always adjust the level of syrup that you're adding to any recipe. Frankly, I see no reason to make the 1-to-1 stuff. It goes bad, and ultimately the only difference is that it's putting more water into your drink. You could just use a smaller glass or not have that water in there, whatever. It's your call. I said it was gonna be quick, but there's some important stuff there, right? Even though it's simple syrup, it's not so simple. That's my cold open. Simple syrup, not so simple. Tonight at 11. As you can tell, I take my health very seriously. Which is why I've consigned myself to mostly avoiding breakfast cereals. Yes, it is a fast and easy way to start my day. Yes, I am of course nostalgic for the delicious junk food I grew up on, but I just can't subject myself to all those sugars and carbs anymore. Because I'm serious about my health. Well, I couldn't anyway until Magic Spoon, who happen to be the sponsors of this episode. Thank you for that, Magic Spoon. These little O's come in a bunch of flavors you're going to find familiar, like cocoa, fruity, cookies and cream, maple waffle, frosted, many more. They have a lot of seasonal offerings too, which is kind of fun. And they taste to me exactly like the cereal you grew up with. Delicious. The only difference, instead of grams and grams of sugar and carbs, Magic Spoon has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving. A serving is only 140 calories. That makes them keto-friendly, grain-free, soy-free, and low-carb. And if that kind of thing matters to you, maybe Magic Spoon is the nostalgia kick you're looking for to start your day. It's delicious, it really is. So, click the link below and build your own 4-pack variety box with code HTD to get $5 off. They're backed by a 100% happiness guarantee, so if you don't like it for any reason at all, they're going to give you back your money, which is very nice. And good news, by the way, if you're in Canada or the UK, Magic Spoon is now available for you too. All right, I'm going to send you back to your regularly scheduled programming while I stay here and enjoy this Magic Spoon. So now you got your simple syrup, you could have gum syrup. You could turn it into gum syrup. You will find a number of pre-prohibition recipes that call for gum syrup. Gum syrup is nothing more than simple syrup that's been thickened a bit with the addition of gum acacia. That is a powder that's made from the sap of the acacia tree, so far as I know. It gets into that syrup best with the addition of some heat. It's gonna take some work because it really wants to clump up and not mix, but with a whisk or a blender even, you will get it to take. The idea with gum syrup is that it will add a really velvety, silky texture to the drink. It's not exactly the same as like an egg white, but it moves the drink into that direction, okay? How much gum should you add to your quantity of syrup? I've actually seen a lot of ratios for this one, from like nearly equal parts gum to sugar, all the way down to just a few grams of gum to a liter of syrup. It really depends on how you plan to use this syrup, I think. But I think personally for general use, a ratio of 1 part gum to like 20 parts syrup will yield a nice general use gum syrup. And that's by volume, by the way, not by weight. By weight, I don't even know. It'd be like 1 part gum to probably 300 or 400 parts syrup at minimum. I just eyeball it by volume. And honestly, that kind of works out well because you can always adjust it. You could look at it and be like, you know what, that's not really thick enough. Just throw it back in the pan and add some more gum to it. It's not a big deal. If you look up other recipes on how to make gum syrup, and they're right, by the way, what I'm about to tell you, this is 100% correct. I'm just too lazy. It is best practice to mix the gum, the powder, with a portion of the water that will be of your syrup plan and let it sit for like a day or even 2 to properly let that gum dissolve into the water. It looks like it will never dissolve. It will if you just leave it alone for a really long time. If you're impatient like me, you can definitely get it in there in other ways. There are 11 other syrups in my bar. More after this. All right, so you've got simple or gum if you felt like getting fancy. From there, you can easily make any fruit into a fruit syrup, and you find a lot of pre-prohibition cocktails that call for these things frequently. Pineapple syrup comes up, raspberry syrup, they both come up quite a bit. Most of your fruits out there, their flavor is in their juice. And sugar is hygroscopic, which means really simply that water and wet things in general, they want to get themselves into the sugar. They want to jump out of what they're in and get into the sugar if you expose it to a high concentration of sugar. That's good for us because it means that it's really easy for us to use sugar as an infusion medium. So for a fruit syrup, yeah, you can just take simple syrup, add some fruit to it, and just let it do its thing over time. Naturally, it'll infuse, just shake it up once in a while and away it'll go. Or you can hurry it all along by kind of cooking them together. That's gonna help a lot. With a raspberry syrup, it's like what I do. Just take some raspberries, some simple syrup, throw them together, heat it up, and boobity boom, and then strain it out. With some fruit, you can take plain granulated sugar and just put it on the fruit you're infusing and wait. Sugar will suck the juices right out. Strawberries are great for this. If you use a kitchen scale, I would just put an equal weight of whole strawberries or sliced strawberries. I've done it both. It's faster, I think, when you slice them, but it works fine with whole ones. Into sugar and just shake it up and make sure that they're well covered, and come back a few hours or even a day later, you will have strawberry syrup or something close to strawberry syrup. If your sugar isn't all the way dissolved, you just dump it into a pan, boil it, it's going to clear right up. And that, to me, I think is the ideal way to go if you can, because you are adding no water, which has no flavor at all. You're going to get a way more powerfully strawberry syrup doing it this way than if you were to take like simple syrup, which has water added to it, and then infuse strawberries into it. You can always rebalance these things. You're not committed to anything that's in these bottles. You can add more syrup to them. You can take them out, throw them back in the pan, add more ingredients, cook them up, whatever. And syrups are fun ways to get all kinds of new ingredients into the drinks that you're mixing up, fruit syrups and stuff like that, or to preserve those fruits. You can make a Clover Club. In the book, it calls for raspberry syrup, right? So there's your raspberry syrup for a Clover Club. Bingo. You can also make a Clover Club with fresh raspberries. It works fine too. There is another ingredient that is traditionally made this way of doing a sugar extraction. I'm not sure if it's technically a syrup actually, but I'm talking about Oleo-Saccharum. It's a fancy sounding name. It's Latin-ish because it's not how Latin works, but they're Latin words. Here's my Oleo-Saccharum. Look at that Oleo-Saccharum. It's like neon greenish yellow and oily. And it is oily because Oleo-Saccharum, it's oil and sugar. This is a pretty ancient ingredient. Way back in the days before refrigeration, people had to figure out ways to preserve and elongate the utility and edibleness of their fresh citrus, and that's where Oleo-Saccharum comes in. There is a ton of flavor in the oils and the peels of citrus, particularly oranges and lemons. This extracts that oil into a usable syrup. It's made very simply by sitting citrus in peels, mainly lemons, and granulated sugar. I've always gone with the ratio that I read that David Wonders uses for this one, which is about 2 ounces of granulated sugar to each lemon's worth of peels. Obviously, your lemons' peels have different amounts of oil in them. They are different sizes. There's really not a good way to give you a scientific measurement for this because of that. You put that all together, the lemon peels and the sugar, you put that in a jar or Tupperware, whatever you like, shake it up from time to time and just let it develop slowly over time. A syrup, technically, I don't know if it's a syrup, but it's an oily sugar, will form from the oils in the peels. And if it doesn't, well, maybe you need to add more peels or fresher peels, or maybe you need more sugar, or maybe you need to take it out and boil it up. This ingredient is the vital component of traditional punches as they were made in like the 1700s, 1600s, the days of punch's ascendancy before the cocktail. So far I've covered simple syrup, gum syrup, fruit infusions, and by extension, Oleo-Saccharum. Now there are 3 specific syrups that show up all the time and belong behind your bar. I'm talking about Grenadine, ginger syrup, and Orgeat. And I'm gonna do those right after this message from our sponsors. Tonight at 11, so far we've covered simple syrup, gum syrup, fruit infusions, and by extension, Oleo-Saccharum. Now, these are the 3 specific syrups that show up all the time. They are the standard syrups for every bar beyond simple. The standard elevated syrups, the stuff that's like one step beyond your simple and gum syrups. I'm talking about Grenadine, ginger syrup, and Orgeat. So first up is Grenadine. Traditionally, this is really nothing more than simple syrup where the water component is replaced with pomegranate juice. And by the way, if you thought Grenadine was red flavor or cherry juice, it's not. It's pomegranate. Traditionally, Grenadine, though, is really not much more than simple syrup, where the water component of your simple syrup is now pomegranate juice. Maybe you throw in a touch of pomegranate molasses. I like to do that. And a few drops of orange blossom water. Yeah, this is what I use, Cortaz. Cortaz from 1930. the Lebanese Kitchen. You can get this on Amazon. I'll put a link in the pinned comment below. This is a really handy ingredient to have for bartending in general. It lasts you a super long time because you dole it out in drops. I'm pretty sure this is used in Middle Eastern cooking and a few other countries as well. Boy, I just love the smell of this stuff though. I mean, it just smells like paradise when you open it. It's an amazing smell. And there's plenty of 100% pomegranate juices on the market. Like Pom Wonderful. Just find one that's 100% pomegranate juice, no water added. Same as with Simples, I make this 2-to-1, but with the addition of a few ounces of pomegranate molasses, brings up that flavor intensity. I've always bought my pomegranate molasses. I've heard you can make it. I don't know anything about that. And I always throw in a couple drops of orange blossom water. It's pretty, from what I understand, pretty standard for these recipes. 6 or 7 drops of orange blossom water, or orange flower water, whatever you like to call it. It's done. Let it cool, throw it in a bottle. What do you use this for? Well, other than drinks that call for grenadine, there is a famous drink that calls for grenadine, the Shirley Temple. The Shirley Temple is nothing more than lime juice. This is the right way to make a Shirley Temple, by the way. You get yourself the lime, all right? You juice the lime. Okay, you do this in a glass, and then just add your syrup in about equal measure, and then top it with soda. And that is how to make a very nice Shirley Temple, which is a great alternative to alcohol if that's your preference. And I'm not being facetious. I think that there's all this emphasis on non-alcoholic mixed drinks now. We've had them for a while. They're soft drinks, and they're fine. and a homemade ginger beer or a really nicely made Shirley Temple is a great thing. I just like bitters and soda, though. I think, honestly, the best non-alcoholic drink is bitters and soda, and if you want, like a drop of sugar, perfect. There we have a really good Shirley Temple. I went a little heavy on the lime, but that's pretty perfect. Excellent. Ooh, I like that. So now, let's talk about Orgeat. Orgeat. Orgeat, Orgeat, Orgeat. I know what we should. How do you pronounce Orgeat? Orzo. Here we go.
Orgeat.
Orgeat. Or if you like it slow.
Orgeat.
Orgeat! So passive aggressive.
Orgeat.
I guess you say the T, but it does say American pronunciation. How do you switch to the French? Here's Emma.
Orgeat. French, orgeat.
Orgeat if you're French, Orgeat if you're an American. Interesting. Orgeat. Okay, well, let's get to talking about that. Why is Orgeat French? Orgeat is a traditional French almond syrup. Yes, there is an archaic form of this that suggests that it should be made with barley, but that was out of style long before cocktails, and no cocktail recipe you find looking for Orgeat is calling for barley syrup. The idea is to get 1 part almond water into 2 parts sugar and make a solution. And you might be tempted to reach for a carton of plain, non-flavored, non-sweetened almond milk. Plenty of people do and seem to be happy with the results. I have never gone that way though. When I make my homemade Orgeat, there's a separation that occurs, and you can see it happening here. This was just bottled, but you can see that like white foam at the top here, that kind of pearlescent stuff that's coalescing. And that's the fats and oils from the almonds. And I shake it back in before I use it. I just shake it up real good. You'll never see that in commercial almond milk. You'll never see that, and very few of the commercial Orgeats on the market, actually. In fact, the only one I can think of that does this, at least every bottle I've bought, is Small Hand Foods, which is why that's the only one I ever recommend when I talk about buying commercial Orgeat. And when I actually started making my own recipe, I bought a bunch of those and I kind of worked from it as an example of what Orgeat should taste like. So I assume, based on not seeing those fats and oils there, that they are simply not present in most almond syrups and most Orgeats. Should they be? Does it matter? I don't really know, but I've always liked everything that I've made with my Orgeat. I like the texture. I like the drinks it produces. It's an ingredient that certainly predates the processes of homogenization and fat removal, so I think it probably belongs in there. There's flavor and texture in those fats and oils, so I prefer to keep it. If that's not important to you, you can save a lot of work by going with some like unflavored almond breeze. In my case, I do it this way. I get my almonds, generally work with around a pound. I was making it with less than that today. I put them in my blender and I cover them with water, more than, maybe like even double the amount of water. I used to just start with just enough water to cover the almonds, but as I've been making this for a while, I keep adding more and more water to it and it keeps coming out fine. And then I just blend that into a slurry. I may add more water at times if it's like too thick and it's straining the motor and it's like choking it. Then ideally, I guess you would let that slurry sit for a few hours. Traditional recipes for Orgeat call for like cracking the almonds and putting them in water and letting them sit in the water overnight. If you're in a rush, I don't think it matters much. You have done a heck of a good job of mechanically separating everything that was in those almonds out by blending the crap out of them. The dust that's in that water probably doesn't have a lot left in it after minutes. The surface area is so diffuse. You know, there's so much surface area for that water to suck stuff out of. I think that it's pretty good. I used to take that slurry and I put it into this old centrifugal juicer to separate it from I had it from 1973. It was my father-in-law's. I don't have that juicer anymore. It kind of failed on me. I have a masticating juicer now. I hadn't tested doing this before I shot this, but it did work. It worked great. So I just take the almond slurry, feed it into the juicer, and get a fresh, high-fat, high-flavor almond milk out of it. If that almond milk is too thick, and it was this time, there's still too much almond pulp in it, just take it and put the whole thing into a nut milk bag or cheesecloth. The nut milk bag literally that's what it's called a nut milk bag for. It's making nut milks. It was invented for this, and just manually squeeze it out. If you're doing it the traditional method with a bowl of cracked almonds in water, maybe even pulverized almonds in water or whatever, you're gonna go that way and you're gonna really have to squeeze it out. The juicer is really good at separating solids from watery things, right? Even a masticating juicer, a centrifugal juicer, whatever kind of juicer you have, it does a lot of that first step for you, and then what you have left over afterwards to put through a mesh or a filter or whatever is much less work. If you wanted to get it super duper duper clear, you'd have to go through some kind of almost like a coffee filter, and it will take days to drip through that, and you'll have to change filters constantly. I honestly think it's way more labor than it's worth. You're gonna lose your damn mind trying to do that. I wouldn't bother. So that you got your almond milk, the rest is pretty easy. You figure out how much almond milk you wound up with. I use a scale, and then combine that with twice as much sugar and a few drops of orange blossom water. I like to add the orange blossom water after I'm done with the heat part, so I just add the sugar, and this is true of the grenadine too. I don't know, I'm worried for some reason that the orange blossom water will cook off if I put it in there when I'm boiling things. It probably won't. Just do what you want, but that's what I do. And heat it up until that is dissolved, and you're gonna have to, I don't know, I boil this a little longer. It has a different consistency than a straight simple syrup, and it won't really do the visual transformation that simple syrup will do right before your eyes. So you really just want to make sure that you've done a really good job boiling that sugar into the almonds and let it cool and bottle it. And it's vital in a number of tiki and classic cocktails, notably the Mai Tai, but lots of classic cocktails call for Orgeat as well. Right after this, let's get to the final syrup, the syrup that made me want to do this episode in the first place, ginger syrup, coming up next. Tonight at 11. Finally, the syrup that made me decide to do this whole syrup pantheon episode, the ginger syrup. So if you look online for recipes, most of them work the way that I make mine. You take a whole lot of ginger, you slice it or dice it up pretty fine to maximize its surface area, put that into a pot with water and sugar and simmer it a very long time to extract flavor. And that is how this ginger syrup is made. The way that I do it when I'm making this kind of syrup is I will put 2 parts sugar and 1 part water in a pot like I'm making simple. Then, and also my ginger root, however much I'm going to use, usually like a pound, as much as I can fit in there, right? Like you want to fill that volume of liquid and sugar with ginger. Then I'll take a measurement, and I use, although the numbers are off on this, but this is like a metal board scraper, and it has like inch marks on it, right? I'll take a measurement. I'll say how much, that's 2 to 1. That's how much water needs to be in this pot for it to be 2 to 1, wherever that measurement is. Then I'll add a lot more water to it. Why? Because I want to simmer this a really long time. Ginger does not have a lot of juice in it. Well, it actually does have a lot of juice in it, but it doesn't want to let go of it the way like fruits do and stuff like that. It's a root. And in this process, it takes time and heat to work those flavors out. If you just boil it, your ginger's not done cooking. Like you can see, it hasn't started to curl up or really kind of shrivel or anything. It takes another 45 minutes to an hour. And so you want to put more water in it than you need and then cook that water back down to the level that you want it to wind up at for that 2 to 1 ratio. Using this process to make this style of ginger syrup, I have found it's like impossible to get a ginger syrup that is really, really hot, like sharp ginger beer hot. Sometimes in the past, I've taken to like fortifying this with the addition of a few inches of ginger root that I've thrown through a juicer and just tossing it straight in there. Not bad, definitely does the trick. Then I encountered the recipe that Eric Castro uses, and he ditches the water altogether. He juices all of his ginger, which this masticating juicer did a great job of. Then weigh the juice, do a little math. I combine that with sugar in 3 parts sugar to 4 parts juice ratio. Heat that on the stove until it's dissolved, and that's it. Pour that back through like a sieve or something like that before it goes into the bottle. It is awesome. It is super duper hot. It's got some sediment forming on the bottom. That's okay. It'll stay down there actually. It doesn't really want to move either. You have to like vigorously shake it off, and you don't really need it to. It's fine. This is hot enough. And you notice it's totally different in appearance, right? Like this is primarily sugar with some ginger flavor. This is primarily ginger juice with some sugar. As a result of my thoughts on this being very, very hot, I have an instinct that is like, maybe I should rebalance the ratio here towards something a little bit fiery for my own purposes. You can do that yourself if you'd like. I made this one straight up doing that 3 to 4 Eric Castro recipe. Having access to a truly hot ginger syrup is great because you retain the option to use this syrup alongside standard simple syrups in a drink, or dial that down a lot of different ways. You can never dial your ginger up, right? So it's great to just have like mega ginger in a thing that you can dole out in small quantities. Now that's not 2-to-1 sugar, so it shouldn't be shelf stable at room temperature. You got to keep that in the fridge, probably might last a week or two. For that reason alone, I do wonder what a 2-to-1 version of this would be like, if it's workable or too sweet to be versatile. I don't know. I should have done it. I haven't done it yet. I don't know why. Well, I know why I didn't. I've been shooting for 2 days and I was tired of shooting these close-ups, so I'll leave that for another day and I'll tell you how it went or not. Those are all the syrups that I really think you should have at least a working knowledge of making for your bar. If you need any of these, this episode will stay up here. We will timestamp each of the recipes and we'll link straight to those in the future in other episodes. Hopefully this is useful to you. I think it's a good idea to just have this on the channel. I hope that it was fun and that you enjoyed it. Remember that these are, most of these should be self-stable and you can make soft drinks with them. You know, if you have kids or something like that, or people who don't want to drink, these are great things to have on hand around your house or whatever. And if you're avoiding sugar, they're terrible things to have on hand around your house. You shouldn't have them. They're bad for you. But, you know, if you don't mind some things that are bad for you, I hope you don't. You're at the drinking channel. These are fine once in a while, and certainly you need them for cocktails. Should you like, follow, and subscribe? Probably. I don't know. Whatever. You do what you want. But what I will say is I've been making the show for 6 years. There's a lot of episodes, and this is like a support episode designed to be sort of like the background architecture that you use when you're watching another episode and you want to make a drink. You link back to this one to find out how to make the syrup in that one, and you should check out some of those episodes too. So why don't you? And I'll see you very soon with another episode of HTD.